Yes, thank you, Martin. I do want to tell you about clothes on the Starship, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to tell you about a lot of other things as well. And I'm going to ask you all to come with me on a journey. It may be a rather long journey. It starts about 40,000 years ago. And as Martin pointed out, it's going to reach a certain point in about 100 years. And it's also going to go rather far. It's going to leave the solar system, but its ultimate destination might be surprising to you. Now, as it's set up there, I am both affiliated with the University of Rhode Island and the university here in Reykjavik, in Háskóli Íslands. And I'm an anthropologist. I'm a former costume designer for theater and film. I teach at a textiles and fashion merchandising department, and now just recently I'm a professor of folklore and museum studies in Iceland. And I don't mention that just to prove that I have the longest job title in the world, but also to point out that these are the perspectives that I bring to the project. So just if you want to just put that over there for a second, and just keep that in mind, that I'm coming from several directions at once, and hopefully it'll all make sense at some point later. So this project begins with a very simple question, and the answer is less simple. But this began 2 years ago for me, where sitting in the driveway one morning, coming back from the hospital where my daughter was gravely ill, and I had been up for quite a number of days and rather dizzy, and had heard an interview with Dr. Mae Jemison, a former astronaut, on the radio. And I was so fascinated by this interview that I sat there in my driveway. I have what they call on NPR a driveway moment, and couldn't wait just to hear more. And when the interview was over, in my dizzy, sleepless, slightly frantic state, I ran inside and I wrote an email to Dr. Jemison. And she had just started this 100-year Starship project, which is about bringing a Starship out of the solar system within 100 years by 2112. I wrote an email and I asked, "What are you going to wear?" And to my surprise, 2 days later, I get a phone call saying, "Nobody's thought about this. You have to come down to Houston now." And I said, "It's the 100-year Starship, isn't it?" But the thing was, they were having their first conference. I went down to Houston. I was there on stage. I presented this question. Before me spoke an astrophysicist, a specialist in solar flares, NASA's main specialist in satellite photography, a bioengineer who specializes in growing growing bone in living beings, and is hoping to be able to do that with humans very soon. And then there was me, talking about socks and laundry. And I'm going to have to bleep myself in just a moment, because the response from the astrophysicist the next day when I was having coffee with him, he told me the only thing I could think of when I saw your first slide go up was, "Oh, bleep, now we have to think about this." And that's exactly it. You see, what he could see, what even I couldn't see at that moment, was he could see that tsunami of things that followed that question. That it's not just what are you going to wear, it's what are you going to be? What are we going to be? What does going into space as a culture mean? Clothing, as we know, is about identity. It's about identity as individuals. It's about identity as groups. It's about identity as nations. But it's about so much more. Clothing is both functional. It serves a purpose. It keeps us warm. It keeps us sheltered. But it's also cultural. This is how we dress here. I get dressed up to stand on stage. This is not what I would wear for maybe some other occasion. In some other culture, somebody else would perhaps wear something different, and so on. How are we going to navigate this? Who's going to decide? We're hoping this is more than one culture that goes, and if so, which one? But then it's also emotional. Clothing is about comfort. Clothing is about memory. Clothing is about being. Now, the thing about space, and here's the thing that happens, and here's where my astrophysicist friend really put his very well-educated finger on the button much faster, was that when you add the words in space to any question, very strange things start to happen. Very simple questions start to mean very different things. What are the numbers in space? How to outfit a village in space? Here, you try it. Will there be life? Space. You see? You see? Now think about it for a second. What about ecosystems? In space. Who will make things? In space. What kind of society will develop? In space. Yeah, you see. Will there be milk in space? Can I have tea in space? My favorite question, however, these days, and the one that I'm bugging the astronauts with, is will there be poets? So here, let's take a look at those questions. What are the numbers in space? Now, here's just a very quick, practical design question. So let me put on my designer hat. Notice the metaphor. Let me put on my designer hat and tell you about the numbers. Currently, at the International Space Station, this is how they go about it. They change their clothes less frequently than we do here on Earth. They don't need to. They don't sweat quite in the same way. There's obviously no weather. There's very little dust. Dust is not welcome on the space station. So you see they change their socks, their underwear, 4 to 6, 7-day rotations on those. Shirts and pants maybe once a month. Dirty laundry is not done. Nobody does laundry in space. The laundry question is driving everybody crazy. And the laundry just goes into a packet. The packet goes into a capsule. The capsule gets ejected, and it burns up on re-entry into the atmosphere. Also known as the dorm room dream of laundry. Then what happens is that they get new clothes. Now this is wonderful, but we can't do this. If we're going to send people out of the solar system, that's a 40-year mission with current technology. It's getting shorter all the time. I'm told that right now we might send a mission and it would take 25 to 30 years. But just notice the numbers. Let's say we do what the space station does right now. You'd need half a shipping container per person. Now the mission needs to have about 2,000 people on board. And a recent study shows that that might actually be way too low. It might be 10 to 40,000 people, and that comes down to the genetics. That's the smallest group you can have that does not start to run into genetic problems within 3 generations. So we're going to have a lot of clothes on board if we try to do it this way. We're going to have a whole container ship full of clothes per 2,000 person community. So if we have 5 of those latched together, we can't put them together, they get to visit each other once a year, the genetics thing. And these are all hooked up to some kind of ship and so on. That's an awful lot of clothes. And the problem is, it costs $10,000 a pound to put something into space. So that's a very expensive pair of jeans. Now, how would we do this? Here's an experiment I did with some students this year. On the left, you see a space suitcase from the University of Iceland, where a group of students in ethnology did this experiment. The other picture is from students in a fashion theory course out in Rhode Island. Anybody notice a difference? The difference is what matters. Notice that. Notice what they think about as simply the human experience of packing for the trip. What would you bring? What would you pack? You have one suitcase. It's your personal bag. Books, yarn, clothes, photographs, dolls. I like the heels. The 4-inch heels. I asked her, I said, this is a spaceship, you know that, yes. She said, you can never be too sure. So there we go. But the point is that this is human. This is not technology. This is human. This is emotion. This is culture. All right, let's put that aside for a second. What about the ecosystems? How do they play in? If we're going to make clothes, wear clothes, recycle clothes, everything on these ships, and at least on the first bases on Mars and hovering off Triton or Europa or Enceladus or wherever they go. These are going to have to be completely closed-loop ecosystems. Everything that goes in stays in. 99.99% efficiency on materials, on food, on water, on everything. And that includes human bodies. That includes, well, you name it. Okay? We could play the same game. So then we have another question. Who is going to make things? Or is everybody going to be an astronaut and an engineer? That's not going to work. Somebody has to make something. Somebody has to be able to sit there and put something together. Dr. Jemison knows how to knit. I told her, keep practicing. Other astronauts have not been instructed in the fine art of weaving, or spinning, or cutting. But of course, that's just the clothes. Now think habitats. Now think food. You see, it comes down to, and notice what just happened. See the little game I just played with you? I start by asking, what are we going to wear? And now we're suddenly thinking about what kind of society is going to be up there or out there. What will happen? Now, one of the things I'm beginning to see, strictly from the clothing point of view, is that we're going to go into a pre-industrial mode of society. That everybody on board has to know a lot about a lot of things. We can't be these modernist specialists that we are now. This is like in the early days of exploration, when the ship's doctor was also the naturalist and the artist and a gunner, right? And this is how we work. This is how clothing, just like architecture or art, can define a society. All these small aggregates, all these things coming together, all these people on the street, putting on their clothes in the morning, shopping for clothes, deciding on their style, wondering who they are, then all together on the street become this strange thing, society. Now, what if that's a spaceship? Then what? And if, as some think, it's going to be 3D printing that makes all these clothes, that means everybody gets to make their own. Who makes the rules? And before you know it, you're suddenly thinking on a very, very intimate level about bodies and behavior and the very being of humans. What are we when it comes down to such basic needs? What would you do if you had to make all your own clothes? What kind of clothes would those be? How would you do it? And that begs the question, will there actually be humans on these expeditions? Or are we going to go all robotic? Is it going to be all technology all the time? And what does that mean for us as humans if we decide that all we're going to do is to observe the universe at a distance? We're not going to be there. And that is in the deepest sense of the word being. What if all we do is data and resources? What if everything is about numbers and just looking at things at a distance? What does that mean for us if it's all just robots and cameras and no human experience? Some of you are already beginning to see where this is going. You see, it's a problem that we encounter right here now on Earth, is that for the past couple of centuries, we have been removing ourselves further and further and further from nature. We have observed the world increasingly through technology, right? You have your little screens, you see the world through the screen, and this is how you experience the world. You don't actually touch it. You're not actually in it. You just view it. I'm not making a judgment about it. This is just how it is. And we start to view nature simply as resources, right? A river is just there to be hydroelectrically resourced somehow. Wouldn't that change our perception of the moon or Mars if either one of those were just parceled out into mining franchises? If you looked up at the moon at night and what you saw there was a series of mining conglomerates digging it up, duking it out, and possibly even fodder for future wars. It slightly takes a different view to the universe, does it not? Another way we might look at this is whether what we are designing in these communities and in these plans that we are doing is whether we are actually designing this for the humans or for the machines. And this is one of those things where in this project, because I've only been working on it for a couple of years, this is where I suddenly have to stop and tap myself on the shoulder and say, did you just say that? What on earth are you talking about? Weren't you talking about socks and laundry? And now what have we got, Terminator and WorldNet? But what I mean by that is not so dramatic. It's just, think about the 20th century in design, the big word, ergonomics, right? Human-centered design. What that really is machine encompassing design. It's putting the human into the machine, making it work. This is very important in factories and mechanized warfare. Which brings us, strangely enough, to my favorite question. Will there be poets? And why should we worry about poets? Now, the thing about poets, and you can put artists, if you like, stand in there, or creative people, but I think the poets will emerge. I don't think you can keep the poets down. So we might as well send them. To be human is to actually have a creative spirit, and I think we've all seen proof of that here today. I don't think I need to elaborate. To actually be a human being is to have that drive to imagine, to build, to wonder, and to experience the world in a way that almost allows you to be slightly awed by it. And that's probably the difference between the moon as is and the moon as a mining conglomerate. You see, human beings imagine ourselves into existence. This is what we do as cultures. This is what we do as people. This is what we do as couples, right? This is falling in love. This is being together. Is we imagine what we are and then we become that. And so the Starship may actually be a way of imagining ourselves into an existence that is less demanding of resources, less dangerous in terms of nationalities and conflicts between groups, that is less technologically focused and more human focused, because the question of whether we need humans at all is a real one, and it's debated. And there are people who maintain that all of this will just happen from machines. But the question then really, if we look at it from that point of view, is why should we actually have physical humans on Mars when we can do this by machine? Why should we send a ship out of the solar system when already we have Voyager that just left the solar system, and it's not sending a lot of data, but we can do it, so let's send another one and a bigger one with better communications technology and cameras and stuff. Now there's a question. Maybe the destination is closer than we think. Maybe the metaphor, maybe the imagining of the Starship is really about our planet. Or maybe it's not about the planet, because imagine Earth without humans. The evolutionary line dies out. The planet's fine. It stays. We're not there. Why save the planet? For whom are we saving the planet at that point? The second thing is, try to imagine humans without Earth. All habitats, all environments, all designed spaces, and no contact with nature. Is that where we're headed? Is that what we're going to be? Maybe that's where we already are. Maybe that's what we need to fix. You see, a thing that Dr. Jemison says a lot, and I'll just quote her here directly, is that what is needed for survival in space is exactly what is needed for survival on Earth. We need to be able to view this from the point of view that our destination is actually the journey. We have to understand that by thinking ourselves into space, we actually realize what we are here on Earth. You see, the Earth is a closed-loop ecosystem. Wow, you're good. And that's really where it comes from, and that's where this strange journey seems to come back to even before we leave. That this idea that we can create a closed-loop ecosystem for a 10,000 person community in space means that if we can do that, and remember, our mission is to enable the flight, not to go on the flight. If we can do that, then we have done this for a 10,000 person community anywhere, right? Then Husavik can be sustainable. And so can the Sudan. And so can Beijing, right? You see, the thing is that, why the Starship then? Well, the Starship's romantic, right? We are star stuff and we should be going through the universe. That's wonderful. And it can be inspiring. It can be an adventure. And human beings need stories. We thrive on narrative, and we like poetry, and we want adventure. And it can be economic, fine. There are resources. Let's go get them. Let's use them. But for me, I think of the journey as this wonderful description from T.S. Eliot. I think of my clothing project, the socks and the laundry, this way. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So if the Starship is what it takes to imagine an ecologically sound, human-centered society, then I say let's go. Let's discover our home in space. Thank you.